We can't take life for granted anymore because every single day you just don't know what's going to happen, and we don't feel secure and safe in our own school. Like, how can you not be scared after something like that happens? People I know, people I pass in the hall every day, just gone, and yeah, I'm scared.
That's a student from Parkland, Florida, expressing the fear shared by many survivors trying to deal with the massacre that took place in their school on Wednesday. 17 people died, including 14 students. The gunman, a former student at the school, is in custody. The CBC's Stephen D'Souza is at the high school today. So, Stephen, what's the latest on the police investigation?
Well, adding to the fear that students are feeling is the fact that as the days go on, more and more details are emerging about red flags and possible missed signals by law enforcement about Nicholas Cruz. We're hearing from CNN that he was a part of an Instagram chat group where they discussed very violent acts as well as anti-Semitic and homophobic slurs. Local media reporting that in September of 2016, Nicholas Cruz was investigated by the local sheriff as well as Child and Family Services because he cut himself on Snapchat. And then we're also hearing, of course, this all comes along with the fact that the FBI yesterday admitted that they received a tip at the beginning of January that Nicholas Cruz was a potential danger, that he had an affinity for guns, that he had expressed violent thoughts, and he was possibly planning a school shooting, something that we know took place, of course, 6 weeks later. The FBI saying that the tip simply wasn't passed on to the local office and followed up. And, you know, you hear from the FBI. We heard now from the governor of Florida saying that he wants the head of the FBI to resign over that. And when we hear from students expressing the fear, the school here is still very much a crime scene. Officials here locally, Natasha, talking about possibly demolishing the building because many students and parents I speak with say they simply don't want to set foot on there ever again.
Stephen, we know President Trump has made an appearance. He's meeting with people. He's visited the hospital. What did he have to say?
That's right. He made a surprise appearance to the hospital as well as visiting the sheriff's office yesterday. He spent about 45 minutes visiting with victims in the hospital as well as first responders. Let's listen to a little bit of what the president had to say yesterday.
I just got back from the hospital. A young woman was shot 4 bullets, 2 in her lungs, and they got her over to the hospital in less than 21 minutes. She had no chance, and between the first responders, your people who got her, you know who I'm talking about. They got her there, Scott. What a job you've done. And the doctors did a great job over at the hospital. A combination which is incredible. And I hope you're getting the credit for it because, believe me, you deserve it.
What we're seeing there is the president follow a pattern that we've seen after the mass shootings that have happened under his watch, where he stays in a bit of a safe zone and he compliments the first responders and the work that they have done, but doesn't really offer any words of condolence to the victims and the families, and definitely stays away from the thorny issue of gun control. And that's something that's caused a lot of anger here in the community. We've heard from so many students speaking out over the last few days and expressing anger at Congress as well as the president. That anger is going to be front and center later this afternoon at the federal courthouse in Fort Lauderdale, where a rally is planned, where students as well as the community is going to call for stricter gun control in the wake of this mass shooting.
The CBC's Stephen D'Souza reporting from Parkland, Florida. Thank you. Well, protesters took that anger over the shooting to the headquarters of the National Rifle Association. A few hundred people gathered in Fairfax, Virginia to demand gun control.
Now I have to bury my best friend who was committed to University of Indianapolis for swimming.
The crowd included friends of some of those who died in Parkland, Florida. The NRA has defended sales of AR-15 rifles, the weapon used in Florida and other mass shootings. Amy Klinger is with the Educators School Safety Network, a nonprofit group that supports safer schools. We've reached her today in Toledo, Ohio. So Amy, thank you for making the time for us today. I want to begin with this issue of what the authorities knew. We know that the FBI got a tip about a posting on YouTube that was made by a Nicholas Cruz. They've acknowledged that they didn't follow up the way they needed to. Yesterday, we heard from the Broward Sheriff's Office that they received at least 20 tips from the public about Nicholas Cruz. And yet it still wasn't enough. So where do things go from here? If the public is being told, inform the authorities aren't acting.
Well, that's certainly a critical concern. And it's not just in this particular event. We know that more than 90% of the time, these individuals are engaging in behaviors of concern prior to the attack. And so it really speaks to the need for a more systemic approach to threat assessment, both at the education level as well as at law enforcement and governmental levels. So it is a critical concern.
You work with schools, with teachers to create a safer environment. Take me through a scenario. If you think a student might pose a threat, is demonstrating some activities that might alarm an educator, what do they do? What's the protocol for them to follow?
Well, and that's part of the problem. If we have threat assessment, which doesn't occur very often in schools, and it absolutely needs to, but if we have a threat assessment team, we have a means to identify those individuals we feel are at risk for violence against themselves or others. We can assess how concerned we should be, how real the threat is, and then most importantly, we can manage, we can do something about it, whether it's done internally in the school with supports and interventions, whether it's referred to law enforcement for further action, whether it's a combination of those things. But it's really critical that we pick up these people, not just individuals who are at risk for a potential attack and the horrific things we saw this week, but also individuals who are at risk for violence against themselves or engaging in other risk-taking behaviors. So it's not just about stopping the next shooter, it's about stopping all violence in schools.
Is there enough right now within schools, for teachers to have resources? Like, what are you calling for?
We are calling for, we need to stop buying stuff. We need to stop arguing about things that we will never be able to settle and start at the foundational underpinnings that everyone can agree on. No kid should be dying in a school. So let's start there, and let's start with training. Let's start with providing our schools with the resources they need, not necessarily metal detectors and fences, but investing in our people. Those educators who were responding to that event, those educators who are dealing with these students before they become violent, we need to provide them with the training and the resources they need to deal with these students and to be able to identify and intervene before tragedy occurs. And that can't always be done, but it can be done at a much better rate than we're currently doing it.
In this instance, it seems that teachers were aware. Nicholas Cruz was removed from the school. Teachers had been informed that this is someone to look out for. In fact, even the other students had mentioned that they were concerned that he might pose a safety risk. So it seems people had the training and they had the resources and they went to the authorities. Maybe, what about the argument that you just can't stop something like this?
There are some, I mean, a determined attacker, yes, there are some attacks you maybe will never be able to stop. But I think what's critical is that many of these attacks had the same fingerprints all over them of someone who would disclose their intentions and the system didn't work or there weren't systems in place to be able to get them. But I think equally important, it's important to note that just this school year, there have been 16 thwarted plots in the United States where someone did say something and it was picked up and those attackers were stopped. And so we have to be vigilant, and we can't fall back into this complacency of there's nothing we can do, because there is so much we can do. We just have to have the will to do it, to invest in our educators.